today we're going to read Magic Tree House, Dinosaurs Before Dark. Chapter 1, Into the Woods. Help! A monster! Said Annie. Yeah, sure, said Jack. A real monster in Frog Creek, Pennsylvania. Run, Jack, said Annie. She ran up the road. Oh, brother, thought Jack. This is what he got for spending the time with his 7-year-old sister. Annie loved pretend stuff, but Jack was 8.5. He liked real things. Watch out, Jack, the monster is coming, said Annie. Jack didn't say anything. Come on, Jack, I'll race you, said Annie. No, thanks, said Jack. Annie raced alone into the woods. Jack looked at the sky. The sun was about to set. Come on, Annie, it's time to go home, yelled Jack. But Annie didn't answer. Jack waited. Annie, he called again. Jack, Jack, Annie shouted. Come here, quick. Annie groaned. This better be good, he said. Jack left the road and headed into the woods. The tree was lit with a golden late afternoon light. Over here, called Annie. Annie was standing under the tall oak tree. Look, she said. She pointed at a rope ladder. It was hanging down from the high in the tree. Wow, Jack whispered. At the top of the tree was a tree house tucked between two branches. That must be the highest tree house in the world, said Annie. Who built it? Asked Jack. I never seen it before. I don't know, but I'm going up, said Annie. No, we don't know who it belongs to, said Jack. Just for a teeny minute, said Annie. She started up the ladder. Annie, come back, said Jack. But Annie kept climbing. She climbed all the way up to the tallest branches. Jack sighed. Annie, it's almost dark. We have to go home. Annie disappeared inside the treehouse. Annie, said Jack. Jack called. Jack waited a moment. He was about to call again when Annie poked her head out of the treehouse window. Books! Annie shouted. What? Annie said. It's filled with books, said Annie. Oh man, Jack thought. He loved the books. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He gripped the sides of the rope ladder and started up. Chapter 2, The Monster. Jack crawled into the treehouse. Wow, he said. The treehouse was filled with books. Books were everywhere. Very old books with dusty covers and new books with shiny bright covers. Look, said Annie. You can see far away. She was peering out the treehouse window. Jack looked at the window with her. Below were the tops of the other trees. In the distance, he could see the Frog Creek Library and the elementary school and the park. Annie pointed in the other direction. There's our house, she said. Annie was right. Jack could see their white wooden house with its green porch. In the yard next door was their neighbor's black dog, Henry. He looked very tiny. Hi, Henry, shouted Annie. Shush, we're not supposed to be up here, said Jack. Jack glanced around the treehouse again. He noticed that the bookmark was sticking out of the many of the books. I wonder who owned all these books, he said. I like this one, said Annie. She picked up the book with the castle on the cover. There's a book about Pennsylvania, said Jack. He turned the pages with the bookmark. Hey, there's a picture of Frog Creek, said Jack. It's the picture of these woods. Oh, here's a book for you, said Annie. She held up a book about dinosaurs. A blue thick bookmark was sticking out of it. "Let me see," said Jack. He set down his backpack down on this floor and grabbed the book from Annie. "Okay, you look at that one and I'll look at that about the one about castles," said Annie. "No, we better not," said Jack. "We don't know who these books belong to." But even as he said this, Jack was opening the dinosaur book to the place where the bookmark was. He couldn't help himself. Jack turned a picture of the ancient flying reptile. He recognized it as a pteranodon. He touched the huge bat-like wings in the picture. "Wow," whispered Jack. "I wish we could go to the time of the pteranodons." Jack stands up the picture of the odd-looking creature soaring through the sky. "Ah!" screamed Annie. "What?" said Jack. "A monster!" Annie cried. She pointed out the treehouse window. "Stop pretending, Annie," said Jack. "No, really," said Annie. Jack looked out the window. A giant creature was gliding above the treetops. It had a long, weird crest on the back of its head, a skinny beak, and a huge bat-like wings. It was a real-life pteranodon. The creature swooped through the sky. It looked like a glider plane. It was coming straight towards the treehouse. "Get down!" cried Annie. Jack and Annie crouched on the floor. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. Everything went still, absolutely still. Chapter 3. Where is here? Jack opened his eyes. Sunlight sat through the window. The treehouse was still high up in a tree, but it wasn't the same tree. "Where are we?" said Annie. She and Jack looked out the window. The pteranodon was soaring through the sky. The ground was covered with ferns and tall grass. There was a winding stream, a speeding hill, and volcanoes in the distance. I don't know where we are," said Jack. The pteranodon glided down to the base of the tree. It landed on the ground and stand very still. "So what just happened to us?" said Annie. "Well," said Jack, "I was looking at the picture in the book, and you said, 'Well, I wish we could go to the time of pteranodons,'" said Annie. "Yeah, and then we saw a pteranodon on the Frog Creek woods," said Jack. "Yeah, and then the wind got loud, and the treehouse started to spin," said Annie. "And we landed here," said Jack. "And we landed here," said Annie. "So that means," said Jack. "So that means what?" said Annie. "I don't know," said Jack. She looked at his head. "None of this can be real." Annie looked out his window again. "But he's real," she said. "He's very real." Jack looked at the window with her again. The pteranodon was standing at the base of the tree like a guard. His giant wings were speeding out of either of him. "Hi!" Annie shouted. "Shh!" said Jack. "We're not supposed to be up here." "But where is here?" said Annie. "I don't know," said Jack. "Hi, who are you?" Annie called to the pteranodon. The creature just looked up at her. "Are you nuts? He can't talk," said Jack. "But maybe the book can tell us." Jack looked at the book. He read the words under the picture. "This flying reptile lived on the Cretaceous period. It vanished 65 million years ago with the dinosaurs." "That's impossible," said Jack. "We can have gone to the time 65 million years ago." "Jack," said Annie, "he's nice." "Nice?" said Jack. "Yeah, I can tell," said Annie. "Let's go down to him." "Go down?" said Jack. Annie started down the rope ladder. "Hey, come back," said Jack. But Annie kept going. "Annie, wait!" Jack called. and he dropped down to the ground. He stopped boldly up to the ancient creature. Chapter 4. Henry. Jack gasped as Annie reached out her hand towards the pteranodon. Oh no, he thought. Annie was always trying to make friends with animals, but still was going too far. Don't get too close to him, Annie, Jack shouted. Annie touched the pteranodon's chest. This stroked his neck. She was talking to him. What in the world is she saying? Jack wondered. He took a deep breath. Okay, he would go down too. It would be a good to examine a pteranodon. He could take notes like a scientist. Jack started down the rope ladder. When he reached the ground, he was only a few feet away from the creature. The pteranodon stared at Jack. His eyes were bright and alert. Stop, Jack, said Annie. He feels like Henry. Jack snorted. He's no dog, Annie. Feel him, Jack, said Annie. Jack didn't move. Don't think, Jack, just do it, Annie said. Jack stepped forward. He reached out very cautiously. He brushed his hand down the creature's neck. Interesting, Jack thought. A thin layer of fuzz covered the pteranodon's skin. Stuff, huh? Said Annie. Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out a pencil and a notebook. He wrote fuzzy skin. What are you doing? Asked Annie. I'm taking notes, said Jack. We're probably the first people in the whole world to ever see a real life pteranodon. Jack looked at the pteranodon again. The bony crest on top of his head was longer than Jack's arm. I wonder how smart he is, Jack said. Very smart, said Annie. Don't count on it, said Jack. His brain's probably bigger than a bee. Probably no bigger than a bean. No, he's very smart. I can feel it, said Annie. I'm going to call him Henry. Jack wrote in his notebook. Small brain? Jack looked at the creature again. Maybe he's a mutant, he said. The pteranodon toddled his head. Annie laughed. He's not a mutant, Jack. Well, what's he doing here then? Where is this place? Said Jack. Annie landed close to the pteranodon. Do you know where we are, Henry? She asked softly. The creature fixed his eyes on Annie. His long jaws were opening and closing like a giant pair of scissors. Are you trying to talk to me, Henry? Asked Annie. Forget it, Annie, Jack wrote in his notebook. Mouth like scissors. Did we come to a long time ago, Henry? Asked Annie. Is this the place from long ago? Suddenly, Annie gasped. Jack! Jack looked up. Annie was pointing towards the hill. On top stood a huge dinosaur. Chapter 5. Gold in the Grass. Go, go, said Jack. He threw his notebook into the pack. He pushed Annie towards the rope ladder. Bye, Henry, she said. Go, said Jack. He gave Annie another push. Quit it, she said, but she started up the ladder. Jack scrambled after her. Jack and Annie tumbled into the treehouse. There they were painting. As they looked out the window at the dinosaurs, it was still standing on the hilltop, eating flowers off the tree. Oh man, whispered Jack. We all in a long time ago. The dinosaur looked at the huge rhinoceros with 3 horns instead of 1. It had 2 long horns above his eyes, and the other one grew out from his nose. It had a big shield-like thing behind his head. Triceratops, said Jack. Does he eat people? whispered Annie. I'll look it up. Jack grabbed the dinosaur book. He flipped through the pages. There, said Jack, pointing to a picture of the Triceratops. He read the caption. The Triceratops lives in the late Cretaceous period. This plant-eating dinosaur weighed over 200 pounds. Jack slammed the book shut. Just plants, no meat. Good, said Annie. Let's go see him up close. Are you crazy? Said Jack. Don't you want to take notes about him? Asked Annie. We're probably the first people in all the world to ever see a real-life Triceratops. Jack sighed. Annie was right. Okay, let's go, he said. Jack shoved his dinosaur book into his pack. He slung his pack over his shoulders, and he started down the ladder, and Jack followed her. Just promise you won't pet him, Jack called down to Annie. I promise, said Annie. Promise you won't kiss him, said Jack. I promise, said Annie. Promise you won't talk to him. I promise, said Annie. Promise you won't. Don't worry, said Annie. Annie and Jack stepped off the ladder. The pteranodon gave them a friendly look. Annie blew him a kiss. Be back soon, Henry, she called. Shh, said Jack, and he led the way slowly and carefully through the farms. Well, Jack and Annie reached the bottom of the hill. They became a bush. Annie started to speak, but Jack quietly put his fingers to his lips. Then he and Annie peeked out at the Triceratops. The dinosaur was bigger than a truck. He was eating a flower of a magnolia tree. Jack slipped his notebook out of his pack. He wrote, "Eats flowers," and he nudged him. Jack ignored her. He studied the Triceratops again. He wrote, "Eats slowly," and he nudged him harder. Jack looked at her. Annie pointed to herself. She walked her fingers through the air. She pointed to the dinosaur. She smiled. Is she teasing? Jack wondered. Annie waved at Jack. Jack started to grab her. She laughed and jumped away. She fell into the grass in full view of the Triceratops. Get back, whispered Jack. Too late. The big dinosaur had spotted Annie. He gazed down her from the hilltops. Half of his magnolia fruit was sticking out of his mouth. Oops, said Annie. Get back, Jack shouted again. He looks nice, Jack, Annie said. Nice? Watch out for his horns, Annie, said Jack. The Triceratops gazed calmly down at Annie. Then he turned and looked down the side of the hole. Bye, said Annie. She turned back to Jack. See? Jack grunted, but he wrote in his notebook. Nice. Come on, let's look around some more, said Annie. As Jack started after her, he saw something glittering in the tall grass. Jack reached out and picked it up. It was a golden medallion. A letter was engraved on the medallion, a fancy M. Oh man, someone's here before us, Jack said softly. 7 to the last chapter. Chapter 7. Ready, set, go! Run, Annie, run! cried Jack. Run to the treehouse! Jack and Annie dashed down the hill together. They ran through the tall grass and ferns and past the pteranodon. They scrambled up the rope ladder and tumbled into the treehouse. Annie leaped to the window. It's going away, she said, panting. Jack put his glasses into place. He looked at the window with Annie. The Tyrannosaurus was wandering off, But then the monster stopped and turned around. "Duck!" said Jack. The two of them ducked their heads. After a long moment, they peeked out the window again. "Coast clear," said Jack. "Yay!" whispered Annie. "We have to get out of here," said Jack. "You made a wish before," said Annie. "Right," said Jack. He took a deep breath. "I wish we could go back to Frog Creek." Nothing happened. "I said I wish," whispered Jack. "Wait," said Annie. "You were looking at a picture in the dinosaur book, remember?" "Oh no, I left the book in my pack on the hill," said Jack. "I have to go back." "Forget it," said Annie. "I can't," said Jack. "The book doesn't belong to us. Plus my notebook with all my notes is in my pack and my—" Okay, said Annie. "I'll hurry," said Jack. He climbed quickly down the ladder and leaped to the ground. Jack raced past the potato, through the ferns, through the tall grass, and up the hill. He looked down. His pack was lying on the ground. On top of it was a dinosaur book. But now the valley below was filled with Anontosauruses. They were all standing guard around the nets. Where had they been? Did fear of the Tyrannosauruses send them home? Jack took a deep breath. "Ready, set, go!" he thought. He charged down the hill. He ran to his backpack. He scooped it up. He grabbed the dinosaur book. Jack heard a terrible tuba sound, then another and another. All the Nontosauruses was bellowing at him. Jack took off. He raced up to the hilltop. He started down the hill. He stopped. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was back. It was standing between Jack and the treehouse. Chapter 8. A Giant Shadow. Jack jumped behind the magnolia tree. His heart was beating so fast he could hardly think. He peeked out the giant monster. The horrible-looking creature was opening and closing its huge jaws. Its teeth were as big as steak knives. "Don't panic," thought Jack. "Think." He peered down at the valley. Good. The duck-billed dinosaurs were sticking close to their nets. Jack looked back at the Tyrannosaurus. Good. The monsters didn't seem to know he was there. "Don't panic. Think. Think. Maybe there's information in the book." Jack opened the dinosaur book. He found Tyrannosaurus Rex. He read, "Tyrannosaurus Rex was one of the largest meat-eating animals of all time. If it were alive today, it could eat a human in one bite." Great, thought Jack. The book was no help at all. Jack tried to think clearly. He can't hide on the other side of the hill. The Nontosauruses might stampede. He couldn't run to the treehouse. The Tyrannosaurus might run faster. Maybe he should just wait for the monster to leave. Jack peeked around the tree. The Tyrannosaurus had wandered closer to the hill. Something caught Jack's eye. Annie was coming down the rope ladder. Is she nuts? What is she doing? Jack wondered. Annie watched Annie hop off the ladder. Annie hurried over to the pteranodon. She was talking to him. She was flapping her arms. She pointed at Jack, at the sky, at the treehouse. She is nuts, Jack thought. Go back up in the tree, Jack whispered. Go! Jack heard a roar. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was looking in his direction. Jack hit the ground. The Tyrannosaurus Rex was coming toward the hill. Jack felt the ground shaking. What should I do? Jack wondered. Should I run, crawl back into Dinosaur Valley, climb the magnolia tree? Suddenly, a giant shadow covered Jack. He stood up. The pteranodon was gliding overhead. The giant creature sailed toward the top of the hill. Chapter 9. The Amazing Ride. The The pteranodon coasted down to the ground. He started at the Jack with his bright, alert eyes. What was Jack supposed to do? Climb on? But I'm too heavy, thought Jack. Jack looked up at the Tyrannosaurus. It was starting up the hill. Its giant teeth were flashing in the sunlight. Okay, thought Jack. Don't think, just do it. Jack put his book in his pack. Then he climbed onto the pteranodon's back. He held on tightly. The creature moved forward. He spread his wings and lifted off the ground. Jack nearly fell off as they teetered this way and that. The pteranodon steeled himself and rose into the sky. Jack looked down. The Tyrannosaurus was staring up at him and chomping the air. The pteranodon glided away. He sailed over the hilltop and over the valley. He circled above the duck-billed dinosaurs and all their nests filled with babies. Then the pteranodon soared out over the plain, over the triceratops who was grazing in the tall grass. Jack felt like a bird. The wind was rushing through his hair. The air smelled sweet and fresh. Jack whooped and laughed. He couldn't believe it. He was riding on the back of an ancient flying reptile. The pteranodon sailed over the stream and over the ferns and the bushes. Then he carried Jack down to the base of the oak tree. When they came to a stop, Jack slid off the creature's back and landed on the ground. The pteranodon took off again and landed into the sky. Bye, Henry, called Jack. Jack, are you okay? Jack shouted from the treehouse. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He kept staring at the pteranodon. Jack! Annie called. Jack looked up at Annie. He smiled. Thanks for saving my life, he said. That was really fun. Thank Henry, not me, said Annie. Come on, climb up. Jack started to stand. His legs were wobbly. He felt a bit dizzy. Hurry! Shouted Annie. It's coming! Jack looked around. The Tyrannosaurus was heading straight toward him. Jack bolted to the ladder. He started climbing. Hurry! Hurry! Screamed Annie. Jack reached to the top and scrambled into the treehouse. It's coming toward the tree! Jack cried. The dinosaur slammed against the oak tree. The treehouse shook like a leaf in the wind. Jack and Annie tumbled into the books. Make a wish to go home, cried Annie. We need the book, the Pennsylvania book, said Jack. Where is it? They both started madly around the treehouse. Found it, said Jack. He grabbed the book and flipped through the pages. He found the photograph of the Frog Creek woods. Jack pointed to the picture in the book. I wish we could go home, he shouted. The wind began to blow. Jack closed his eyes. He held on tightly to Annie. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 10. Home Before Dark. Jack heard a bird singing. He opened his eyes. She was still pointing at the picture of the Frog Creek woods. He peeked out the treehouse window. Outside, he saw the exact same view as the picture in the book. We're home, whispered Annie. The woods were lit with a golden late afternoon light. The sun was about to set. No time had passed since they left Frog Creek. Jack! Annie! said a voice called from the distance. That's Mom, said Annie. Jack saw their mother far away. She was standing in front of their house. She looked tiny. Annie! Jack! she called. Annie stuck her head out the window and shouted, Coming! Jack still felt dazed. She just stared at Annie. What happened to us? he said. We took a trip in a magic treehouse, said Annie simply. But it's the same time as we left, said Jack. Annie shrugged. How did it take us so far away? Said Jack. And so long ago. You looked at a picture and in the book and you wish we could go there, said Annie. And the magic treehouse took us there. But how? Said Jack. And who built this magic treehouse? Who put all these books here? A magic person, I guess, said Annie. Oh, look, said Jack. I almost forgot about this. Jack reached to his pocket and pulled out the gold medallion. Someone lost this back there, he said. In Dinosaur Land. Look, there's the letter M on it. Annie's eye got round. Do you think M stands for magic person? She asked. I don't know, said Jack. I just know someone went to that place before us. Jack! Annie! Their mom called again. Coming! Annie shouted again. Jack put the gold medallion back in his pocket. He pulled the dinosaur book out of his pack and put it back with all the other books. Then he and Annie took one last look around the treehouse. Goodbye, house, whispered Annie. Jack slung his backpack over his shoulders. Annie started down the rope ladder. Jack followed. Seconds later, they hopped onto the ground and started walking out of the woods. No one's going to believe our story, said Jack. So let's not tell anyone, said Annie. Dad won't believe it, said Jack. He'll say it was a dream, said Annie. Mom won't believe it, said Jack. She'll say it was pretend. My teacher won't believe it, said Jack. She'll say you're nuts, said Annie. We better not tell anyone, said Jack. I already said that, said Annie. Jack sighed. I think I'm starting not to believe myself, he said. They left the woods and started up the road toward their house. As they walked past all their houses on their street, the trip to Dinosaur Time did seem more and more like a dream. Only this world and this time seemed real. Jack reached into his pocket. He clasped the gold medallion. He felt the engraving of the letter M. It made his fingers tingle. Jack laughed. Suddenly he felt very happy. He couldn't explain what had happened today, but he knew for sure that the trip in the magic treehouse had been real. Absolutely real. Tomorrow, Jack said softly, we'll go back into the woods. Of course, said Annie. And we'll climb up to the treehouse, said Jack. Of course, said Annie. And we'll see what happens next, said Jack. Of course, said Annie. Race ya! And off they took together, running for home. That's the end of this book and channel. If you liked it, please click many likes on this channel and subscribe this channel. Bye!